So a little bit about me. My name is Mark Rackley. I am a solutions architect and I like bacon. I work for a company called Pate Group out of Cincinnati, Ohio. You can follow me on Twitter at mrackley. I am a blogger, developer, writer, speaker. You can go to my blog at sharepointhillbilly.com. I also organize an event in Branson, Missouri. Does anybody know where Branson, Missouri is? Has anybody heard of Branson, Missouri? Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's right in the middle. It's called SharePoint-A-LoozA. And oh yeah, I like bacon. So, our agenda today, we're going to be talking about large lists. We're going to talk about the problem with large lists. Give you some tips and tricks to prepare to start working with large lists. Then we're going to use some REST so you can query those large lists. And then we're going to throw some Jquery on top of that REST query to help you create a list view that is something that's more usable for your users than trying to just work with those out-of-the-box list views. I've basically blogged most of what we're talking about at my blog here. And then all the source code from this session you can find at this GitHub location as well. And that code is out there right now. So let's start with a demo. Let's talk about the problems with large lists. Have you guys run into this problem a lot already? Where you're trying to create a list view and it just craps out on you for no reason? Can I say that? Craps out? Is that a UK thing? Yeah, okay. So let's go ahead and just kind of look at what some of that looks like for those who are not interested or those who don't know. Here we have a list and it's zip codes, cities, states, time zones for states over in the US. Let me change my width here so you can see it better. It's a little too big. So we've got our list view, right? And if we go to the list settings, we can see that this list view has 42,000 items in it. And it's telling our list view threshold is 5,000. The list view threshold for Office 365 is 5,000 items. That doesn't mean you can't store more than 5,000 rows of data. It just means when you exceed that list view threshold of 5,000 items, things start to go wonky on you. Wibbly wobbly for the Doctor Who fans? Yes? Okay. So here we have a list with 42,000 items in it. In the all items view, we can still report on the all items view, right? We can still get our data. We can still search for items. So if I want to look for Arkansas, I can still get back the results that happen in Arkansas. So it's still functional, it's just not quite as nice as some of our out-of-the-box list views, right? So let's try to modify the view. So let's take this view, modify it, and make it more usable. I'm going to group by the state, right? Because that'd be great. People like to group by their data. So I'm going to group by state equals, nope, that's yeah. We're going to group by state. Error. This view cannot be displayed because it exceeds the list view threshold of 5,000 items. All right? Okay, let's try something different. Okay, we won't group by. Let's try to do a filter. All right, at least maybe we can filter by something. So let me get rid of the group by. We'll go and we'll filter where the state is equal to AR for Arkansas. And let's look at that. Still doesn't work. Okay, so what else can we do? How about we just open up the list view, get rid of the filter, and we just try to filter on the actual list view itself. So let's go here and try to filter it. Still can't filter, right? I mean, you just lost a lot of what you can do with these lists. Well, maybe you're a developer and you think, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and write a REST query to filter against this list. So here I have a REST query where I'm basically just querying my list and I'm going to filter. That's cut off on the screen for you guys. We're going to filter where the state is equal to Arkansas. And what I like about a REST query is I can take the query and I can test it in my browser just by copying and pasting it. So let's take this query, copy it, put it in our browser. Another error, right? Still can't query it. So what's going on here? Well, what can we do? How can we make this more usable? So one of the first things you can do to make your large list more usable is to index any fields that you want to filter on, right? The reason this query is failing is because my state field is not indexed. The reason why I couldn't create a filter on the view itself is because the state field was not indexed. So any field that you want to filter on, make sure is indexed. So if I go back into my list here, and I go to my list settings, you see we have an option down here for indexed columns. It will show you your list of indexed columns, and you can create a new index. So I'm going to create a new index on the state field. Can't do it. After your list exceeds 5,000 items, you can't create an index on that list. So your index has to exist before your list gets to that count, right? So you're going to have to do some planning ahead for those lists that are going to go above 5,000 items. Luckily, I have another list here already, and this list is indexed. So if we look at its list settings, we look at its index columns, you can see that I've indexed on several fields, the area codes, county, city, state, and zip. So now that these fields are indexed, I can create views that have filters on them. So I can come in here to the All Items view, and I can say, well, I want to create a field, a view, where I set the state, where the state is equal to Arkansas. And that works. So now I have a view of all the Arkansas, but that's still not a great view of the data I want. And what's worse, if I wanted to create a different view for every state, I would have to create 50 different views, right? Because I can't dynamically filter that with a list view. And I still don't have the ability with a indexed field, if I try to return all rows by not filtering and I want to group by state, it still will not allow me to do that, right? So it just gets frustrating. About the best view that I can come up with out of the box is if I first filter my list view where the state is equal to Arkansas, and then I can actually group by another field. So now I can group by county. And now when I see it, I mistyped something. Sort, filter, so AR. Right, so now we have a view that's something we're more used to. We have group by data. It's filtered by the state of Arkansas, and we're getting close to something that the users can actually use. But again, we have no way of dynamically creating the filter on this. I can't say, now I want to see all the Texas states and all their counties. I'm going to have to create another view for that. So for however many views you want to show, you've got to go and manually create all of these list views, which is not a great experience for you guys to maintain. It's not a great experience to the user. So we're going to look at using some REST to make this whole process a lot better for your users. Is anybody familiar with REST in here? You guys using REST? Do you like it? Yeah, I like REST a lot. We'll talk about why. So let's jump back into the slide deck real quick here. So the problem with large lists is there is this list view threshold. And you can't change it in Office 365. If you've got an on-premises farm, you can make that list view threshold larger, but in Office 365, it's stuck at 5,000 items. And you're going to lose that functionality like I showed you. You're going to use the ability to group by views, to sum and total on views. And if you have a lookup field in another list that looks up to that large list, that lookup field will no longer work. So you're going to run into some problems. And your manual filters on your non-indexed columns just aren't going to work. So get prepared for large lists, right? Think about it. Do you really need to store more than 5,000 items? A lot of times the answer is yes. But maybe you can keep that list smaller by deleting some items, archiving some data that you're not using. Make sure you index those columns that you do want to filter on. And also, worst case scenario, look at using search. Look at using content types in search. That's a great way that you can take advantage of some of the things in SharePoint 2013 to give your users list views that they need. You can actually use a search display template. Anybody done anything with display templates? You guys like display templates? They're pretty awesome because you can apply JavaScript and jQuery to your display templates for your search results. So you can make a search result look a lot like a list view, right? So your users may not even know that this is not a list view. And what's better with search is you can actually aggregate data from multiple lists. I think one of Microsoft's recommendations for handling large lists is to break up your lists into lists of 5,000 items and do something like search. I don't think that's real practical. I mean, it's just, yeah, it gets around the problem, but it's not practical. I'm not going to do it. So let's talk a little bit about REST. Recently, they came out with support for something called JSON-Lite for REST. Is anybody familiar with JSON-Lite? So before we had JSON-Lite, and you were going to make a call using jQuery to your REST, you would have to include in your header OData equals verbose. It's just part of the query that had to be there, and then it would return your data, and it would have a lot of metadata in it, and not just the data you needed. Well, back August of last year, I think, they added support for minimal metadata and JSON-Lite. So we can now make the same jQuery REST call, but we can specify OData equals no metadata, and it shrinks the size of the packet coming back to you a lot. We'll demo this in a second. But it's important when you're thinking about writing REST to query thousands of rows of data that you want those queries to perform as fast as possible, right? So you don't want it to have it return everything from your list. You only want it to return the data that you need. So when you're writing those REST queries, make sure that you're only returning the fields you want, and then also use no metadata so it's a smaller size and it's going to perform faster. So if you want to see the blog article about JSON-Lite, there's a link to that. You guys will have my slide deck as well, so you'll get it from there. So let's take a quick look at a demo of using REST just straight out of the box. Here I have a couple of REST queries. They're basically identical. I've got one called verbose here. Let me scoot this over. Got to get where you guys can see everything. Okay. So here I am making a jQuery call using Ajax to my URL for my list, and I am using OData equals verbose. And here I have another function called no metadata, where I'm making the exact same call, but I'm using OData equals no metadata. And we're going to add this script to a page in SharePoint so we can execute it and see how it works. Any of you guys in my session yesterday? And you came back? Okay. I'll take that as a win in my book. So the way we're going to test this script is we're going to just add the script to our site assets library in SharePoint Designer. So we have our site opened up here. I'm going to go to the site assets directory. And I'm going to add a new JavaScript file. And I'll call it 1.js. And I'll wait. Okay, we're going to edit this file and just paste in our script here. So this script, it's going to reference jQuery. Then it has a couple of buttons that when we click the buttons, it executes those functions. So I'll save this. Come back into my site. I'm going to go to the home page. And I'm going to edit the home page and add that script to it so we can execute it. So I'm going to add a web part. It's going to be a media and content editor. And now I'm going to edit the web part and link to our script. So we see I have two buttons on the page, one for verbose and one for no metadata. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Fiddler. Is anybody familiar with Fiddler? Anybody not familiar with Fiddler? So Fiddler is like the best free tool you can ever download. Basically what it does is it allows you to analyze all the traffic going back and forth from your server, so you can see what data you're sending to the server and what data you're getting back from the server, and it helps you really parse the data and find out what's going on. So when you're writing code against it, you can make sure you're writing code against the right data. It does some other cool things too, but that's the main reason I use it. So I'm going to fire up Fiddler here. Then we'll come here to the page, and I'm going to click on the verbose button. If we go back and look at Fiddler, we can see that here that it is executing our REST query. Blog API. This is our REST query. When it comes back, we can see it has the size of our REST query, 4,115 bytes. I can even click on the query, and I can go over here on this JSON tab here, so I can say, what does this data look like as JSON? And you can actually look at your results in Fiddler. So this is really good to understand what data is coming back from your REST query, because you can take this data and these JSON objects and use them directly in your script. So we saw using verbose, it returned that 415,000 bytes of results. But if I use no metadata, going back to our page and do no metadata, then look at Fiddler again, you can see that size is decreased dramatically. So instead of being 415,000, it's 183,000. Right? So we're pulling less data across the wire. It's going to come back faster, so it's going to perform better. So definitely, if you're going to be pulling that much data, you want to make it as fast as possible. And we can open that up and look at that data as well. And there's our data using the no metadata. The other thing I want to point out is when you're trying to access this data in your scripts, it's really important to understand the structure in which it's returned. If we're looking at the no metadata, we see our results come back in a property called value. So we're going to have to access the results.value in our script. But if we look at the verbose, we see that it comes back in d.results. Right? So if you wrote a query and have a script working with verbose, just change your script to use no metadata and refresh the page, it's not going to work. Because it was getting your data from d.results before, and now it's getting it from view. So you're going to have to be able to make those changes. And again, this is where Fiddler comes in handy to help you figure out why the heck is my script not working anymore. I'll go ahead and exit out of Fiddler here. Any questions? Okay. There's several tools out there like Fiddler you can use. Chrome has one called Postman. Anybody use Postman? So it's a Chrome app that allows you to put REST queries into this application, test them. You can apply different headers and parameters to them. And it's nice because it actually keeps a history of all your REST queries, so you can go back and look at previous ones. You can even do some of this stuff in the developer tools of IE as well. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this stuff. And we can also see the time it took. When we did verbose, it took 8.6 seconds, and when we used no metadata, it took 5 seconds. So it's faster. You can definitely see the performance improvement there. All right, so now that we know how to use REST to retrieve that data, let's do something with that data. One of my favorite jQuery libraries is a library called datatables.net. Has anybody here used datatables? Yeah, you guys like it? It's really simple, easy to use, very, very powerful library. You can get it at datatables.net. It's free. I'm all about free stuff. And this is what a basic usage of the datatables library looks like. You're going to have some table with some ID. In this example, the ID is example. And you're going to tell datatables what you're going to pass in an array of data to datatables. And then you're going to specify what are the column names for that data. So here we just have 2 rows of data, 2 columns of data, one named column name and column name 2. There's another way to call data tables, and that is by passing in an array of objects, an array of JSON objects. So you don't have to specify this array, you can use an array of JSON objects. And what can you return with a REST query? An array of JSON objects. So knowing this, it makes it very easy for us to put data into data tables. So let's quickly see data tables in action. Here I have a script where I'm referencing the jQuery library, the data tables libraries, and the style sheets for data tables. And it seems like it keeps... and I'm hard coding some data into the data table. I'm giving it 13 rows of data with 2 columns. And then I'm saying it's named column name and column name 2. And then I've got a table that's just an HTML table that's going to be used for storing that data table's output. Okay? That's all that's on this page. There's nothing to do with SharePoint yet. So I'm going to take this and just paste it into our script that we're using on our site. We'll save it, and we'll reload our page. So here's what you get. Right, we gave it that array of data. We didn't add anything else, right? We just gave it to data tables. And now you get a formatted table. It's got some nice coloring for us, alternating rows. You can change the style sheets to make it how you want. You can make it so that you can show more than 10 at a time. I want to see 25 at a time. I want to see 50 at a time. You can also sort by the columns just by clicking on them. It'll sort by those columns. And one of my favorite features is this search box over here. If I type in the name or type in text in the search box, let's say I only want to find value 5, it filters dynamically without posting back or doing any other queries. It'll just filters what's in memory. So I can search for anything on that page. Maybe I want to care about row 5. Right? So it's got some nice searching out of the box as well. So this is pretty basic, and it does take an array of JSON objects. So what happens if we just take the raw results from a REST query and push it into data tables? Great question. I'm glad you asked. Cool.
I noticed there's a CDN lurking in there.
Yes.
If I'm on premises and I'm going to access the internet, is there an alternative?
Yes, absolutely. All these scripts, I am using CDN because I'm on Office 365, so that's why. But you can just download a local copy of these and then just save it as a file in your site assets or some other location that you can reference. Yeah. So here's our next example. Same references, jQuery, data tables. I have another table that's going to, an HTML table that's going to hold information. But now we're going to store more information. Let's go ahead and we're going to have the county, the zip code, the city, time zone, area codes. These are all the columns that's going to be in our data. We have a function called getZips. GetZips is going to call into our master zip code list. It's going to return the ID and zip. You can see I'm telling it to select only these fields because that's the only fields I care about, keeping it small. And then we're going to want our data back as JSON, and I'm using the OData equals no metadata. So when the data comes back from the AJAX call, it's going to call this call.done method. And I'm going to call the data tables function on our table, and for the data, I'm going to pass in those results from the REST query directly. I'm not manipulating the data at all. I'm taking the raw results from REST, which was in data.value. If you remember from our REST query, it said value. So you're saying, hey, your data is data.value. And for the columns, it's the property names from the JSON object. So I want to show the county, the zip, the primary city, the time zone. What I like about this is if you have a JSON, array of JSON objects and they have like 10 fields in each object, but you only want to show 2 of those fields in the data view, just specify the 2 fields here that you want to show. You don't have to specify everything in your object, which is also makes things a lot cleaner. If you go the approach of passing in arrays of data, like in the hard-coded example I showed you, if the columns don't match up, you're going to get errors in data tables. So this is another reason why I like using the array of JSON objects. So here's the filter we want to show. Here's the order we want to show them in. I'm telling it that I want my default display length to be 100. And that's all I have to do, right? So I'm not doing anything, any data manipulation, making a REST query, sending those results to my data tables library. So let's paste this in here. Now when we refresh the page, it's going to take a few seconds. 2, 3, because it's getting a lot of data now. So you give it a few seconds, and it comes back. So why did that take so long? It took so long because we were returning 5,000 rows of data. That takes a while. And how do we return 5,000 rows of data? There's a parameter in your REST query called top. And this is where you specify how many rows you want to return. And we say we want 5,000 rows. That's a lot of rows. Think long and hard about doing this stuff, right? When the user comes back and says, it takes so long, sorry, it takes that long. That's how long it takes, right? You can't really make this stuff much faster. So if we look at it, though, we've got this list view now where we can still sort on all the columns. We can do the search like I was showing you before. So I can type in, let's just find New York. You can see it's filtering as I type. It's only showing everything that has New York in the string for it. And you can search in all the fields. Let's say I only care about zip code 24212. I can do 24212. Right, so it gives us that dynamic filtering. But it's only filtering on the 5,000 items that are in memory. So for those other 37,000 plus items that it didn't get pulled back, it's not filtering on those. So this is still not an ideal solution, right? We're not grouping on anything. We're only able to search on the 5,000 that's in memory. So it's a start, but it's not quite what we'd want to do to make something usable. So next, let's take it up a little bit, and let's add the ability for a user to put in which state they want to retrieve the data on, right? Because how can we get our data of 42,000 rows into chunks below 5,000? So for a city, state, zip code database, the state is a great one to use. So we're going to allow the user to just enter the state abbreviation in an input box, and whenever on the key up of the input box, we're going to call the function getZips. And our getZips function this time has the addition of a filter. We're saying whatever state they enter in that box, we're going to filter a REST query on that. So we're going to return less results. We're return less than 5,000 results. We're still going to give it that top 5,000 parameter, though, to make sure to have it return as many about rows as it can. The same thing at the end. When it's done, we're going to pass in the data to the data, the data.value, and display it to the user. We'll also update the title of the web part to say the zip code information for whatever the state they entered was. So let's take this. Refresh our page. So now we have a box for state abbreviation. So now I can type in a state, AR, wait a few seconds, a lot faster, right? We're returning a lot less data. It's telling us that there's 709 results. So now instead of pulling back 5,000, we're only pulling back 709 for the specific state. So I can search for things on this state. I can search for the town I live in, which is called Harrison, and it will filter that down to just Harrison. I can look for just Boone County. Right, it's only showing those results for Boone County. So now it's a little bit better. And now we don't have to go and create 50 different views for 50 different states. We just have the user select the state that they want to see zip codes for. Even large states like Texas, which take a little bit longer, take a lot longer. I blame Eric Sheps for this, because he's from Texas. Finally. It brought back 2,655 records, right? So we're able to, even for larger states, get back all the zip codes for those states. So I can look up Austin, right? So it's getting closer. You could even make that state a drop-down box, right? Or maybe you can even make it a radio button. However you want to make it easier for your users to filter that stuff, you can do that now. So now we can start filtering dynamically without having to create a view for each filter. Getting closer. Still not great, though, right? Let's see what we can do next. Any questions? No? Okay.
You said a radio button, and my ears pricked at that point. If I had A to Z across the top, could I do it that way as well? Have a link on each letter?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because you could make it pass in a query string so that they all go to the same page, and it passes in a query string variable with the state abbreviation, and then that's what you use to actually pass. You want to build that real quick?
Sorry?
You want to build that real quick? Anybody have a problem with me building something real quick? All right. If it breaks, it's his fault, okay? I just want you to know. So let me find my script that I have that allows me to get the query string value since I don't have it memorized. So that's going to be here on OneDrive. So anybody familiar with Arkansas? Can I tell an Arkansas joke and you'll actually get it? So I got married. My wife is from Florida. But before I could move back to Arkansas, I had to adopt her first. So, all right. Good, I'm glad that went over well. Okay, so here I have a function called getParameterByName. And this just reads the query string variable from the URL. So we have getParameterByName and the key. I am going to create a key called state. So on the page load here, I'm going to call that function of getParameterByName. And we say I want to get whatever state is. And then I am going to call getZips, where I'll pass in the state. And now this will take a state as a parameter. Actually, I'll say state param since there was already something else called state there, and I don't want to break it. All right, so it's going to read the state from the query string. It's going to call the getZips function and pass in that state, and it's going to use that state as my filter. So we paste this in here. And now, when I load the page, I'm going to put in a query string that says state equals, I think just AR. Right? So I have state equals AR. What did I do? You're right. You guys are smarter than I am. I'm not going to get rid of that. Okay. Come on. Yes, right? Yes. Let's refresh. Give it a second. So this is where we come to the debugging portion of our class. So open up developer tools. Oops, I'm turning a string constant. That's interesting. What's unterminated? F12 opens developer tools so you can see what's going on in your script. And it's telling me that I have an unterminated string constant. Oh, because there's a stupid. Whose idea was it for me to go off script, huh? No, it was my idea, so I'm the one to blame. There was an extra quote there. All right. So now we'll save it. Refresh the page. See if an error pops up. Ah, there's our state. There's our information. So this is information for Arkansas. So I can now put in Alaska. And there's information for Alaska. There's only 275 zip codes for Alaska. Right? So you could theoretically create A to Z, and when they click on it, just take it back to the same page with the correct query string parameter, it would filter for that state. So you could do that too. Good idea. I may steal your idea if that's all right. Okay. All right. So thank you. So now let's do something to make it one step better. There is an extension to the data tables library called datatables.rowgrouping, and this will give us the ability to do grouping on our rows of data as well. And the way it works is we're creating a class that's going to create plus and minus buttons for us on the end of our grouped rows. And at the end of our data tables call, you call this row grouping method, where you tell it what you want the label to look like for your grouped row, and it takes the first column by default and groups on that first column, whatever it may be. This library allows you to even do multiple levels of grouping, but the performance drastically degrades if you try to group by more than one field on 5,000 items. It takes a while. It takes many seconds for it to actually render. So we're only going to go one deep down for this. So using this script, we'll be able to do that grouping. So let's copy this. And refresh our page one more time. Put in Arkansas again. And now we see it is grouped by our counties. County of Arkansas, we can even now shrink those down. Right, so again, it's getting closer and closer and closer to an actual data view that we can use. And this filter, this search up here, actually will search on that grouped by field as well. So if we just care about things in Arkansas County, I can type in Arkansas County, and it's only showing those things with Arkansas County. So that filter works on all columns. I only care about area code 870. I don't know, I just like this filter. I think it's really cool because just the way, how dynamically it works for you. I use that a lot. Sort and filter on all the fields. Any questions? Okay. So the last step that we're going to take is we're going to make this all just more usable, right? Because it's still kind of not usable for the user. There's a lag, that delay, right? They put in Texas, and they just sit there. Is it broken? Is it working? You know, I don't know. Then it just kind of sits there for a while, and they have to whether it's working. The coloring is not great. We can't really distinguish between rows and stuff that well. And unlike a list view, I can't click on any of these rows and get anywhere, right? It's just a static view. So let's add several more pieces to this just to make it much better for the user. And now Texas came back. It usually doesn't take this long for 2,000 rows to return. I have a feeling it might be the internet speed. That's what I'll say anyway, right? Regardless. So a few things we're adding to this. We'll go through each one of them so you can see it. I've created a div that's just a span with an ID of modal message that says working on it. And I'm going to give this a class so that it kind of displays over the table in a gray fashion so the user sees something, some kind of indicator that something is going on. The other thing I'm going to do this time is I am going to return in my table the actual list ID of the list item entry. Before, the ID was never on the list because we didn't care about the ID. But now if a user wants to click on a row and open that up in its display form, we need to know the ID of the one we're clicking on so we can open it. But I still don't want that ID to show to the user. So if we go back and look at our data tables query, for my ID field, I'm saying that it's not visible. I'm also saying it's not searchable. So when they type something in that search box, it's not going to filter it by the ID, and it's going to hide the ID from the user. We could show it if we wanted to. I just, for a better user experience, they don't really care about the ID either, so I'm going to hide it. Some other things I'm doing is I've got our classes for our little modal message I'm going to show to the user. I could tell you what this does, but I'm not a designer. I copied and pasted it from somebody, so I'm a developer. I don't do design. And then I'm going to go through our groupings, and I'm going to make those stand out more. So I'm going to apply a background color to our group headers. I'm also going to add a color so whenever they hover over the table, it's going to change the color on the row they're hovering on, giving them more visual feedback to what they're doing. And finally, probably one of the trickier things I had to do on this is I'm going to attach to the row click of the data table so that whenever the user clicks on a row, I'm going to execute a function. And if we look at that function, all the way down here, row click, I'm going to take the row, and I'm going to find which row did they click on, and then for that row, I'm going to get the data for that row, and I'm going to get the ID from the object for the data for that row. So I've hard-coded the relative path to this display form, and I'm reading the ID from the row object for that row. And that's how we're going to display that to users. So when they click on the row, it's going to open up the display form. It can open the edit form. It can open anything we want it to open, right? But I'm just going to make it open the display form. Any questions about any of that?
Could you create an app by using this?
Create an actual app? Yeah, I mean, theoretically, yes. Everything, even though we're just doing this with script and a content inner web part, you can take all of these concepts and create an app out of them and do something with an app, right? You just got all of that deployment process in there. You got the packaging in there. And so, yeah, you could totally do that. Yeah. I want a piece of the royalties if you do it, though, okay? Good question. Anybody else? So you can theoretically do this in SharePoint 2010 as well, because there is REST support in 2010, although it's going to be slower because you don't have the JSON Lite support. Is anybody still in SharePoint 2007 by any chance? So you could even do this with SharePoint. There's not a list view threshold in 2007, is there? So why do you care? But you could do this in SharePoint 2007 using Mark Anderson's SP Services library instead of REST to query the list data. So you've got a lot of options for whatever version of SharePoint you're on. So let's copy this, paste it in one more time. So now when we refresh the page and we put in a state, you get working on it, right? So now the user knows something is going on. They get a visual cue that something's happening. When I move the mouse over the rows, the row highlights for me. If I click on a row, it opens up a display form for that row. So now it acts even more like a real list view. I also added the ability, I didn't show you this in the script, let me show you that too. I've added the checkbox that whenever they click on the checkbox, they can choose whether they want the data back grouped or not. So maybe I don't want it grouped, I just want it flat. So I can, in the same page, say whether I want that data to be grouped or not. So let's say I want it grouped by the county. I get the visual feedback that it's working on it. And now I have the county in a nice black grouping, so it's easier to see, right? So now it's visually more appealing to user. It doesn't have to be black, it can be whatever color you want. Again, we've made it easier for them. So for those longer running states, like Texas, what happened? Who broke this? Oh, it went back. Well, my IE is not responding. This is not my script's fault, by the way. Come on, script. Let's refresh. State of Texas. Working on it. But now we know it's working. And this could be animated, or you could do, since it's Jquery, right, this doesn't have to be the hard-coded text working on it. It could be an animated picture if you want. And we wait, and it comes back finally. So right, here we are for Texas. Again, we can hover over the rows, click on them, then we can group by if we want. Group by is going to take even longer because of this connection speed, and it's going to have to group them. Let's give it a few seconds while that loads. Any questions while this goes?
You do a limit with assigned dollar top equals 5,000. But how do you say I want the next 5,000 items?
Excellent question. That's a great question. If I had some swag, I would give it to you, but I don't have any. So for that, let's look at Fiddler again, because we have a few minutes. I can show you this too. So if we look at Fiddler, everybody get his question? He wants to know, well, I'm only getting back 5,000 rows. How do I get back the next 5,000 rows, right? I want to know what those are. And there's actually a way to do that. So if let's go back to our first script that we wrote that returns the 5,000, and let's put that one back. And I go back into our page here and reload it. So I tell it to return my rows. Look in Fiddler where it executes. It's done. If we look at the JSON data for that, there is a result returned called next. And this is the next query you would run that would start from the previous place that it ended and give you the next 5,000 rows. Right? So in the verbose, it's underscore underscore next. And in minimal, or the no metadata, it will be here it is odata.nextLink. So it looks different by the way you call the REST query. Yes?
Once you've gone to that link, does it give you an extra than previous?
Ooh, let's find out. So I just recently started playing with this myself, but that's a great question. He's asking if it gives you a previous link as well. So let's copy this query. Let's just paste it in a place where I can play with it here. So you can see it's giving you a paged equals true, and it's giving you the ID for the next one to start from is what it's doing. So if we take this, put it in our browser, look at Fiddler. Oh, I'm not using the JSON view anymore. Let's see if it's found here in the raw view. Let me put it in where we can see it easier so it's JSON. So I can do data, come on. Data type equals JSON. I believe that's how that works. Execute it again. Wait a few seconds. Did it come back as JSON? It did not come back as JSON. Okay, so that's not the parameter. Let's copy that in. Sorry, we're playing. I don't have any more Arkansas jokes either, so I'm sorry about that. All right, so we're going to just take this in here. And I will replace this URL. Save it. We'll try again. Go back here. All right. Ready to try it. Let's go website. Go ahead and clear this out. Come on. Okay, one more time. Verbose. Check out Fiddler. Look at the JSON. No, just a next. So it does not appear to do, no, that's the 5001 though.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. What did I do wrong? You know what? I was on the wrong one. I was supposed to hit minimal metadata. Again, when you go off script, you guys mess me up. I'm good, but I'm not that good. I'm kidding. Nobody tell Steve I said that. All right. So now, let's look at the JSON. OData next link, is that still? It's definitely different this time. Skip token, page, true. I'm looking at it here. Yeah, the ID's changed, but there's not a previous. But you could, I mean, you could cache what your previous was, right? Since you know where you came from before you did the next, you could cache it, store it somewhere, store it in a cookie. Yeah. So, no previous. Sorry. All right, so you saw by adding data tables, we now get filtering, grouping of data using the data table library. We can do styling, and we can add click events, right? So we can give our users a much better user experience with those large lists. And there we go. Do we have any questions?